I was a senior when the first thing I want to tell you about happened. Senioritis had fully kicked in. It was fall semester, and honestly I thought the biggest problem I'd have that year was keeping my grades up enough to graduate. I had no idea that by the time spring came around, I'd be looking over my shoulder every time I walked to my car. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about 3 things that happened during my high school years that I still think about to this day. Story 1, the new girl. I need to give you a little background first so this makes sense. I went to a medium-sized public high school in a suburban area outside of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing special about it. 4 floors, about 1,100 students, the usual mix of sports kids, theater kids, nerds, everyone. I was a junior when this happened. 17 years old, reasonably social, had my group of friends, didn't really get into drama. My friend group was me, a girl named Priya, and 2 guys named Derek and Nate. We'd been friends since freshman year. Ate lunch together every day, hung out on weekends, the whole deal. We were tight. About 3 weeks into junior year, a new girl transferred in. Her name was Simone. I noticed her first in my AP English class because the teacher made her stand at the front and introduce herself, which was excruciating for everyone involved. Simone was quiet through it, barely making eye contact, just answering the teacher's questions in short sentences. She was pretty in an understated way. Dark hair, always wearing headphones around her neck even when she wasn't listening to music. She dressed different from most of the girls at our school, more muted colors, nothing flashy. She sat in the back corner of English and didn't speak to anyone. I probably wouldn't have thought much more about her except that she ended up in 3 of my classes: English, chemistry, and 4th period gym. By the end of the first week, I'd noticed she always sat near me. Not next to me necessarily, but close. 1 desk away, 1 seat over. I didn't think it was weird. In a new school you gravitate toward familiar faces. I was probably just a familiar face by that point. Then she started showing up in other places. The library when I had a free period. The coffee cart near the main office where I bought a drink every Monday morning. The parking lot after school near where I parked my car. Still didn't think much of it. Small world, same routines, coincidence. The first time she actually spoke to me was in the 2nd week. I was at my locker between 3rd and 4th period, and I heard someone behind me say my name. I turned. Simone was standing there with her headphones around her neck, looking at me steadily. "You're Chris, right?" she said. "Yeah." "Simone?" She nodded. Then she said something that threw me completely off. "I've been watching you for a while." I laughed, assuming it was a joke. "That's not creepy at all." She didn't laugh. "I know your schedule. Monday you're at the coffee cart at 7:45. You always park in the same spot in the east lot. You eat lunch with the same 3 people every day." I stared at her. "Okay. I'm not trying to be weird," she said. "I just pay attention. It helps me figure out who's worth talking to." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told her it was nice to meet her and walked to gym class. I told Priya and the others at lunch. Priya said it was bizarre. Derek said maybe she was just socially awkward. Nate said she sounded like a stalker. We all laughed about it and moved on. But then things started getting less funny. The following week, Simone started texting me. I didn't know how she got my number. I never gave it to her. I asked her, and she said she'd found it in a group chat that someone had shared. I couldn't verify that, so I let it go. The texts were normal at first. Questions about homework, asking if I knew what was on the chemistry test. Normal new student stuff. Then they got more personal. She'd text me observations. "You seem tired today. You were in a better mood after lunch. The blue shirt looks good on you." I stopped responding after the shirt comment. She kept texting anyway. At lunch one day, Derek told me he'd seen Simone sitting in her car in the parking lot before school started. Just sitting there watching the entrance. He said she'd been there when he arrived at 7:15 and was still there at 7:50 when the first bell rang. "That's a long time to just sit in your car," he said. "Maybe she was studying," Priya offered. She wasn't. She was just watching the door. None of us said what we were all thinking, which was that she was watching for me specifically. The situation peaked on a Thursday night in October. I was home doing homework, parents downstairs, sister in her room. Normal evening. Around 9 p.m. I got a text from Simone. It said, "What are you doing right now?" I ignored it. 10 minutes later, "Are you upstairs?" I sat up straighter. "What?" "Your light is on in what looks like an upstairs room." "Is that your room or your sister's?" My blood went cold. I stood up from my desk and walked to my window. Looked out into the dark street below. Simone was standing on the sidewalk in front of my house. I could see the pale shape of her face tilted up toward my window. She wasn't even hiding. Just standing there looking up. I texted her immediately, "You need to leave." Right now. She replied. I just wanted to see where you lived. Simone. Or I'm calling the police. Pause. Then you're overreacting. I'm calling the police in 30 seconds. I watched through the window as she looked down at her phone. Then she turned and walked away down the street without looking back. I went downstairs and told my parents. My dad immediately wanted to drive around and find her, which I talked him out of. My mom called the school the next morning. The vice principal called Simone's parents. They were apparently completely blindsided, said they had no idea she was doing any of this and that it had happened before at her last school. That's why she transferred. The family had moved specifically because of some kind of incident with another student she'd become fixated on. They didn't tell us what the incident was. The vice principal said only that it was serious enough to warrant a change of schools. Simone was suspended for a week. When she came back, she didn't look at me, didn't text me, sat on the opposite side of every classroom. She finished the year and apparently transferred again over the summer. I don't know where she went, but I still think about that night. About standing at my window and seeing her on the sidewalk below, completely calm like she'd been doing it for a while. Like standing outside a stranger's house in the dark was completely normal to her. I think about whatever happened at her last school that was serious enough to make her family move. And I think about whoever the next person was that she decided to watch. Story 2, The Substitute. I have to give you some context first because without it, none of this will make any sense. I went to a small high school in a rural part of western Pennsylvania. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, the football team is the center of the social universe, and teachers have been there for 30 years and are basically local legends. I was a sophomore when this happened. 15 years old, thoroughly unremarkable. I had a small group of friends, Tyler, Brandon, and a girl named Meg who I'd known since 4th grade. Our regular history teacher, Mr. Kowalski, had been out sick for 2 weeks in February. He was older, probably late 50s, and had some kind of respiratory thing. Nobody thought much of it. The school had been cycling through substitutes, most of them from the local pool who we recognized from other classes. On a Tuesday morning, 3rd period, a substitute walked in that none of us had seen before. His name, according to the board where he'd written it, was Mr. Rains. He was young for a teacher. Maybe late 20s, early 30s at the most. Tall, lean, with very short hair and a way of standing that was hard to describe, like he was always slightly more alert than he needed to be. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the room. Not in an anxious way, in a methodical way, like he was taking inventory. He took attendance without looking at his sheet. He just went around the room, pointing at each student and named each of us. Every single one. Correctly. We all noticed. I remember looking at Tyler, who raised his eyebrows at me. When he finished, he closed the attendance book and looked at us. Attendance sheets for substitutes are provided by the office, he said, almost conversationally. They include names and general seat assignments. Nothing unusual about knowing your names. A slight pause. Though I'll admit I memorized them on the way here. Old habit. Nobody spoke. He proceeded to teach the lesson. And here's the thing, he was actually good. Better than Mr. Kowalski, honestly. He knew the material cold, moved through it efficiently, connected it to things happening in current events. But something about him was off. Something I couldn't identify for the first few days. By Thursday I'd figured out part of it. He never used notes. Never referenced the textbook. He taught everything from memory, which wasn't unusual for an experienced teacher, except that every day he was covering different material in different subjects. He was subbing in multiple classes across different subjects, and he was equally fluent in all of them. Also, he remembered everything. Every student's name, not just from our class but from every class he subbed. I'd hear students from other periods mention him using their names in the hallway, and they'd have that same unsettled look. Tyler started researching him. Couldn't find anything. No social media presence, no professional profile, nothing online with his name in our school. By the following week, he'd been there for 5 days. Substitutes at our school rarely stayed more than a day or two in the same class. A week was unusual. On Wednesday of that second week, something happened that moved him from weird to genuinely unsettling. We were in the middle of class when Meg's phone went off. She fumbled to silence it, face turning red. Mr. Rains paused his lecture and looked at her. "Meg," he said, and his tone wasn't harsh, just level. "Please put it away." She did. He continued the lesson. But a few minutes later, he stopped mid-sentence and looked directly at me. "Chris," he said, "can I ask you something?" I looked up from my notes. "Sure. You've been watching me the same way I've been watching you. Since Monday. What are you trying to figure out?" The room went dead silent. I didn't know what to say. He was right, I had been watching him. But the fact that he'd noticed and had waited 5 days to bring it up, and was doing so calmly in front of the whole class. "I don't know what you mean," I said. "Yes you do." He didn't say it aggressively, just matter-of-factly. "I'm going to assume it's curiosity and not hostility, so I'll tell you this much. I'm covering for Mr. Kowalski until he returns. That's the whole story. Is that satisfying?" "Yeah," I said. "Sure." He held my eyes for a moment longer than necessary, then continued the lesson. After class, Tyler grabbed my arm in the hallway. "What was that?" "I don't know." "He said he's been watching you." "He said he noticed me watching him." Which is also weird. Why does he care if a student is watching him? I didn't have an answer. That afternoon, I went to the main office and asked the secretary about Mr. Rains. Told her I had a question about an assignment and needed his contact information. She looked at me blankly. "Who?" "Mr. Rains. The substitute in Mr. Kowalski's class." She pulled up the schedule on her computer, frowned, typed something, frowned again. "There's no substitute listed for Kowalski's class this week." "He's been there all week." "Tall guy, late 20s. She shook her head slowly. "According to our system, that class has had no coverage this week. The last substitute we had in was Monday of last week." "That's not right," I said. "He's been there every day. The whole class has seen him. He takes attendance." She gave me a concerned look. "I don't know what to tell you, honey. He's not in our system." I walked back to the history classroom. Empty now, class had ended an hour ago. I stood in the doorway, looking at the whiteboard where he'd written his name at the start of every class. The whiteboard was blank. Completely blank. Freshly erased. I asked 3 other students from the class if they remembered Mr. Rains. All 3 did, described him the same way I would have. I asked a student from a different period in that room. She looked at me strangely and said they hadn't had a sub all week. The class had been self-supervised with worksheets. Mr. Kowalski came back the following Monday. I waited until the end of class and asked him who had covered his class while he was out. He said no one. The school couldn't find a substitute for his specific class, so they just assigned worksheets and had the students supervised by a teacher from next door, who checked in periodically. He hadn't been replaced by anyone. I went home and told Tyler everything. He was quiet for a long time. "So who was the guy in our class for a week?" he finally asked. "I don't know." "And why doesn't anyone outside our class remember him?" "I don't know." "And how did he know all our names before we introduced ourselves?" I didn't have an answer for any of it. I still don't. I've thought about it hundreds of times since then. Every explanation I come up with falls apart under even basic scrutiny. He was there. We all saw him. He taught us for 5 days. He took attendance. He spoke to us individually by name. And then he was just gone. And nobody outside of our 30-person class seemed to know he'd ever existed. I graduated 2 years later. Tyler and I still talk about it sometimes. Neither of us has ever figured out who Mr. Rains was, or what he was doing in our classroom for a week, or why he admitted he'd been watching me. Story 3, the senior trip. I want to be upfront about something before I tell you this. I've never shared this publicly before. Not online, not with most of my friends, barely even with my family. Part of me still wonders if going public is a mistake. But enough time has passed now that I think it needs to be said, because I genuinely believe that if I had known about what I'm about to describe before I went on this trip, things would have gone very differently. The background: I was a senior. Our school did an optional senior trip every year. Basically 3 days at a rented campground and conference center about 2 hours away. Hiking during the day, supervised activities in the evening, bonfire on the last night. About 60 students went, along with 4 teachers and 2 parent chaperones. I went with my best friend Marcus and another close friend of ours, a guy named Desi. We'd all been looking forward to it since junior year. The campground was called Ridgeview Outdoor Center. It was a legitimate place, rented by schools and corporate groups for retreats. Multiple dormitory buildings, a main hall, hiking trails, a lake. Nice, well-maintained, normal. We arrived Friday afternoon and got settled into our dorms. Boys in one building, girls in another, teachers in a third smaller cabin near the main hall. Standard setup. The first day was great. We hiked, messed around, ate dinner in the main hall. Normal trip stuff. By 11 p.m., everyone was in their dorms, lights out rule in effect. Marcus, Desi, and I were on the same floor sharing a 4-bunk room. There were about 8 of us in the room total. We stayed up talking until maybe midnight, then started drifting off. I woke up at around 2:30 a.m. Not to an alarm, not to any specific sound, I just woke up. The room was dark and quiet. Everyone else seemed asleep. I needed the bathroom, so I climbed out of my bunk and walked out into the hall. The hall was dimly lit by emergency exit signs. I went to the bathroom at the end of the corridor, did what I needed to do, and was heading back to the room when I heard something. Footsteps. Outside the building. Now, in context, this wasn't automatically alarming. We were at a campground. Teachers might be doing checks. Someone might have snuck out. Could be anything. But something about the footsteps made me stop. They were slow and deliberate, moving around the perimeter of the building. Not the walk of someone going somewhere. The walk of someone who was circling. I went to the window at the end of the hall and looked out. There was a man standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 40 feet from the building. He was completely still, looking at the dormitory. He wasn't a teacher. I could see that immediately. He was older, wearing dark clothing, and he was just standing there at the tree line in the middle of the night, staring at a building full of high school students. I watched him for almost a minute. He didn't move. Didn't look around, didn't check his phone, didn't do anything that suggested a legitimate reason for being there. Just stood and watched the building. I went back to the room and shook Marcus awake. He was annoyed until I told him what I'd seen, then he followed me back to the window. The man was still there. Marcus pulled out his phone to take a photo. The flash was off, but just as he lifted the phone, the man turned and walked back into the trees and disappeared. I debated waking up one of the teachers. But it was almost 3 a.m. and what would I say? There was a man standing near the trees? He wasn't doing anything technically. And he was gone now. I went back to bed but didn't sleep much. In the morning I told Desi. He took it seriously and said we should tell someone. We told Mr. Patterson, one of the teacher's chaperones. He listened, nodded, and said he'd look into it. He didn't seem alarmed. Said campgrounds sometimes had neighboring properties, that it could have been a local resident walking at night. 40 feet from the dorm building. At 2:30 a.m. Staring at it. I didn't find that convincing. The second day proceeded normally. Hiking a ropes course, lunch by the lake. I kept scanning the tree line whenever we were outside but saw nothing. That night, the bonfire. Everyone gathered around it in the main clearing, roasting marshmallows, taking pictures. It was exactly what a senior trip was supposed to be. Around 10 p.m., I stepped away from the group to use the bathroom in the main hall. I was walking the path back alone when I noticed something. There were two of them now. Standing at the far edge of the clearing, partially obscured by shadows, just outside the reach of the bonfire's light. Two figures watching the group of students around the fire. My heart rate spiked immediately. I went back to the bonfire and found Marcus. Pointed to where I'd seen them. By the time Marcus looked, they were gone. I'm telling Patterson, I said. Right now. Tell him what? You saw two people in the dark? Yes, because that's terrifying. I found Patterson and pulled him aside. Described both incidents. His demeanor changed this time. He excused himself and made a phone call. I saw him walk over to the other teachers and speak quietly to them. 15 minutes later, he came back to me and said we were ending the bonfire early and everyone was going inside. He didn't explain why. Just said it was getting late. The remaining students went inside the main hall, confused and a little annoyed. The teachers did a head count, twice. Then we were taken to our dorms with strict instructions to stay inside, doors locked, until morning. I didn't sleep at all that second night. In the morning, we were told the trip was being cut short. We packed up and loaded the buses that morning. Nobody explained why, at least not to the students. On the bus ride home, one of the parent chaperones sat near me and Marcus. She seemed shaken, which the teachers didn't. I leaned over to her and asked what had happened. She looked like she was deciding whether to tell me. Then she said quietly, the campground called the police last night. Apparently, there are incidents they've had before, people from outside using the property after hours. The police found evidence someone had been in the storage shed adjacent to your dormitory building. What kind of evidence? I asked. She hesitated. I don't want to alarm you. I'm already alarmed. Please. She told me the shed had recently been occupied. Sleeping bag, food wrappers, something written on the inside of the shed wall. She wouldn't tell me what was written. The police had been on the property from about 3 a.m. onward, she said. The people I'd seen had left before they arrived. How many people were out there? I asked. They found evidence of at least 3. 3 people, camped in a shed adjacent to a dormitory full of sleeping high school students, watching the buildings at night. The campground owner apparently knew it had happened before. Previous groups had reported seeing figures in the tree line. The owner was being investigated for not reporting the incidents to police or to the schools that rented the property. I looked it up later. Found a brief local news article. The campground closed down about 6 months after our trip. The article didn't give details about why, just said the owner had faced regulatory action. I contacted the reporter who wrote the article. She didn't respond. I don't know what those people wanted. I don't know how many times they'd done this before, how many school trips they'd watched from the trees. What I know is that if I hadn't woken up at 2:30 a.m. and gone to the bathroom, I never would have seen that first man at the tree line. I never would have told Patterson. The teachers might have chalked up the second sighting to nothing. And 60 high school students would have spent another night there, unaware that they were being watched. I'm glad I said something. I'm glad I pushed when they didn't take me seriously the first time. But I still think about those writing on the shed wall. The thing the parent chaperone wouldn't tell me. I've never been back to a campground since. And I check the tree line every time I'm outdoors at night. Every single time.